Welcome to this deep dive into Giorgio Agamben's Homo Sacer, Sovereign Power and Bare Life. You've shared some material on this. Seems like you're really interested in getting to the core of how power operates in the modern world.
Yeah. Agamben really doesn't offer any easy answers or comforting platitudes. He really kind of confronts us with this bleak reality, arguing that sovereign power is fundamentally paradoxical, existing both within and outside the legal order it creates.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. So Agamben draws heavily on Carl Schmitt's definition of the sovereign as he who decides on the exception. This implies a figure who can suspend the law, creating a space of absolute power.
Precisely. And he uses the Roman legal principle of justitium to illustrate this concept. Justitium was a state of exception, a suspension of all laws, basically leaving a legal void, where the sovereign's word was law. Now, this concept of the exception, it's really crucial for understanding Agamben's central figure, the Homo Sacer.
So the sovereign creates the law, yet stands outside it, able to suspend it at will. So where does the Homo Sacer fit into this?
The Homo Sacer is a figure from Roman law. It's an individual who's excluded from both the legal and religious spheres. They could be killed with impunity, and their life held absolutely no religious significance. Agamben uses this figure to illustrate bare life, a life that's been stripped of all political and legal protections, reduced to mere biological existence.
And this is where Agamben's argument really takes a chilling turn. He posits that the concentration camp is the defining biopolitical space of modernity.
Yeah, the camp for Agamben is the ultimate manifestation of the state of exception. It's a zone where sovereign power operates, without restraint, reducing life to bare life. It really blurs the lines between inside and outside, exception and rule, demonstrating how sovereign power can really function beyond traditional legal frameworks.
And this isn't just about physical control, right? Agamben seems to be suggesting that. Modern power operates by managing and controlling life at its most fundamental level.
Exactly, and he traces a shift in power, from sovereign decision over death to the management of life itself, through what he calls biopolitics. And a chilling example of this is the concept of life that does not deserve to live, which emerged in Nazi Germany. In this chilling context, medical professionals became involved in deciding who should live and who should die, a terrifying convergence of medicine and political power.
It's a bleak picture. You flagged a connection to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. Can Agamben's concept of Homo Sacer be applied to the situation of Palestinians under Israeli occupation?
It's a really complex and sensitive issue, one worth exploring. Agamben himself actually refrained from directly applying this concept to the Palestinian situation. However, his framework does give us tools for understanding the power dynamics at play.
So how can we apply Agamben's analysis without resorting to oversimplification?
Well, we can start by examining this concept of the state of exception. Israel has repeatedly declared states of emergency in the region, justifying its actions on security grounds. And within this state of exception, Palestinians are often subjected to measures that are outside the bounds of normal legal procedure. Think curfews, checkpoints, detention without trial, even targeted killings.
So essentially, Palestinians exist in this permanent state of exception. Their lives are at the mercy of the sovereign power. Does this align with the concept of bare life?
Precisely. When basic rights and freedoms are denied, when lives are constantly under threat, individuals are reduced to bare life, to Homo Sacer. It's a stark reality, particularly in the context of Gaza, which has been transformed into a space where the distinction between bare life and political qualified life becomes tragically blurred.
This raises some unsettling questions about the nature of sovereignty and its ability to operate. Outside the norms of international law, are we witnessing the creation of a space where individuals can be killed with impunity, much like the Homo Sacer of Roman times?
It is a disturbing thought, and Agamben's work compels us to confront this possibility, the situation in Gaza. When we view it through his framework, it raises really profound questions about the limits of law, the exercise of sovereign power, and the very value of human life in the modern world.
So the state of exception, the reduction to bare life, these aren't just abstract concepts. They have real-world consequences, particularly in a situation like Gaza. But how does Agamben, how does he build his argument further? What are the philosophical underpinnings of these concepts?
Well, to understand this, we have to delve a little deeper into Agamben's engagement with with the ancient Greeks and their concept of life. You see, they had two terms that we often kind of conflate: zoo, which denotes mere biological existence, and bios, which indicates a qualified life, one worthy of political participation.
So it sounds like Agamben is arguing that the Homo Sacer existing in the state of bare life is reduced to zoo, stripped of the political and legal dimensions of bios.
Precisely. And this reduction, this stripping away of bios, is really central to Agamben's critique of modern power. He sees it as this dangerous erosion of what it means to be human, to have a life worthy of dignity and recognition.
He also engages heavily with Foucault in Homo Sacer, right? Foucault's analysis of biopower seems to be crucial for understanding how this reduction of life takes place.
Absolutely. Agamben sees a direct lineage from Foucault's work on the way power, increasingly focuses on managing and controlling life through institutions like prisons and hospitals, to the creation of bare life in the camps. And he suggests that biopower, in its drive to regulate and optimize life, ultimately reduces it to its barest form, stripping it of its political and ethical dimensions.
And this management of life goes beyond physical control, doesn't it? It's about shaping desires, defining what is normal and healthy, essentially controlling populations at a fundamental level.
Precisely. That's where the concept of life that does not deserve to live becomes so chilling. It's not simply about biological death, but about the elimination of certain lives, because they're deemed unproductive, unfit, or otherwise outside the bounds of
what is
politically valuable.
Agamben's book is undeniably dense, but he does use some striking examples. To illustrate his points, you made a note about the Roman ritual of devotio. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, the devotio was a ritual where a Roman general would dedicate himself to the gods of the underworld in exchange for a victory in battle. This ritual, it's a form of self-sacrifice, highlights this really complex relationship between sovereignty, sacred life, and the power over death.
So the general, in a sense, becomes Homo Sacer, offering his own life to ensure the survival of the Roman state. He's both inside and outside the law, embodying that paradoxical relationship with the sovereign.
That's a very keen observation. The devotio demonstrates the paradoxical nature of sovereignty, how it resides at the very limit of life itself. And it reveals the way sovereign power can demand the sacrifice of life, even as it claims to protect and preserve life.
Agamben then examines another Roman legal concept, the vitae necisque potestas. Can you shed some light on that?
The vitae necisque potestas was the power of the Roman paterfamilias, the head of the household, to decide on the life and death of his family members, including children and slaves.
So a father could legally kill his own child? That seems almost unimaginable.
It is a shocking concept to modern sensibilities, but it gets to the core of Agamben's argument about bare life. He's showing us how, even in ancient Rome, there existed this zone of exception where a sovereign figure held the power to reduce life to its purely biological dimension, the paterfamilias, within the confines of his household, held this power of life and death, a power that really mirrored the sovereign's authority over the state.
And he links this ancient power to modern forms of sovereignty. Is he suggesting that this power of the paterfamilias is somehow still operating in the modern world?
Absolutely. Agamben argues that the Venus, the power of the paterfamilias, prefigures the modern sovereign's claim to control and manage life itself. And he sees this power reflected in contemporary biopolitics, where the state increasingly intervenes in the lives of its citizens, regulating health, reproduction, and even death itself. It's a chilling thought, but one that forces us to confront the ways in which power can operate in subtle and often invisible ways.
This all paints a rather bleak picture of the modern world, a world where bare life is constantly at risk of being exposed and eliminated.
Now, there's no denying the Watteau at the darkness in Agamben's vision, but his analysis is intended as a wake-up call, a challenge to think critically and ethically about the mechanisms of power operating in our world. He's asking us to confront the beingness, the potential for tyranny that exists within even the most seemingly enlightened and democratic societies.
You mentioned that Homo Sacer is only the first part of a larger project. Where does Agamben go from here? Does he offer any solutions, any ways out of this seemingly inescapable logic of power?
Well, Homo Sacer lays the groundwork for what Agamben calls the Homo Sacer project, a multi-volume exploration of sovereignty, biopolitics, and the state of exception. In subsequent books, he examines a wide range of topics, including the relationship between language and power, the role of the messianic in politics, and the potential for resistance in a world dominated by biopower.
So he doesn't just leave us with this bleak vision of bare life. There's a possibility, however slim, of thinking beyond the state of exception, of imagining a different kind of politics.
Agamben's work is ultimately a call to action, a challenge to find new ways of understanding
Uh-huh.
and resisting the call, the forms of power that threaten to reduce human life to its barest form. He doesn't offer any easy solutions, but he does provide us with the tools for critical analysis and the impetus for radical thought. It's a project that requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and a commitment to challenging the status quo.
And one of the ways he challenges the status quo is through the very structure of his book, right? You mentioned that he intentionally plays with the traditional form of philosophical writing.
Agamben's style it's deliberately fragmented and elliptical. He jumps between historical examples, philosophical concepts, literary allusions, forcing the reader to actively engage with the text. It's not a passive reading experience. He demands that we work through the material, grapple with the complexities, and really confront the implications of his analysis.
It's certainly not an easy read, but I can see how this fragmented style might mirror the fragmented nature of bare life itself, the way in which individuals are stripped of their context, their history, their humanity.
Precisely. The form of the book really reflects the content, creating a reading experience that is both challenging and illuminating. It's an experience that forces us to confront the ways in which power operates, not only in the world, but also in our own minds.
Now, let's delve into some specifics here. Agamben draws heavily on other thinkers like Schmitt, Benjamin, and Foucault. How does he weave their ideas into his own argument? How does he build on their work to create his unique perspective?
Agamben is really a master of synthesizing. Diverse philosophical perspectives. He draws on Schmitt's concept of the exception, Benjamin's notion of divine violence, and of course Foucault's analysis of biopower to create this really original and thought-provoking theory of power. It's not simply a rehashing of their ideas, but a creative and often unsettling reinterpretation.
Let's start with Schmitt. You mentioned his definition of the sovereign as he who decides on the exception is really central to Agamben's thinking. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Schmitt, who was writing in the context of the Weimar Republic, was attempting to grapple with the nature of sovereignty in a time of crisis. And he argued that the sovereign is the one who holds the power to suspend the law in a state of emergency, creating a space where they can exercise absolute authority. It was a way of understanding how power could function in these extreme circumstances, in moments when the normal rules of the game no longer applied.
And Agamben takes this idea and pushes it further, right? He sees the exception not simply as a temporary measure, but as the very foundation of sovereign power.
Exactly. For Agamben, the exception is not an aberration, a departure from the norm. It is constitutive of the legal order itself. The sovereign is not merely the one who applies the law, but the one who decides what the law is and when it can be suspended. It's a chilling insight into the nature of power, revealing its inherent capacity for arbitrariness and violence.
This makes the sovereign incredibly powerful, doesn't it? They have the ability to decide who is included in the legal order and who is excluded, who is granted the protection of the law, and who is left exposed and vulnerable.
Precisely. And it's through this power of inclusion and exclusion that the sovereign creates this category of bare life, of Homo Sacer. The Homo Sacer is included in the law only as an exclusion, as someone who can be killed without consequence. They are, in a sense, the living embodiment of the sovereign's power to decide who lives and who dies.
So the sovereign, through the very act of defining the exception, creates the category of bare life. The terrifying thought, one that challenges our assumptions about the relationship between law, power, and the value of human life.
It is. And it's this power to create and define bare life that Agamben sees as the latter, the defining characteristic of modern power. It's a power that operates not through brute force, but through these subtle mechanisms of inclusion and exclusion, through the creation of categories and classifications that determine who is worthy of protection and who is not.
Now let's talk about Benjamin. You mentioned his idea of divine violence. How does he integrate that into his analysis? How does this concept of violence, often seen as destructive, contribute to his understanding of power?
Benjamin's concept of divine violence is a complex and challenging one. In essence, it refers to a form of violence that operates outside the law, a violence that disrupts the existing order and creates the possibility for something new. It's a violence that is both destructive and creative, a force that shatters the old to make way for the new.
But how does this relate to Homo Sacer? The Homo Sacer is one who is subjected to violence, not the one who wields it. How can we reconcile this apparent contradiction?
Agamben sees a connection between the violence that establishes the state of exception and the violence that's directed at the Homo Sacer. Both are forms of violence that operate outside the law, and both are constitutive of sovereign power. And he suggests that the sovereign's power to decide on the exception is itself a form of violence that creates the space for the exclusion and elimination of bare life.
It sounds like Agamben is suggesting that. There's a kind of dark, violent undercurrent to the very foundation of the political order, a violence that is often hidden or disguised, but that is nonetheless essential to the functioning of power.
That's a very perceptive reading. Agamben's work is unsettling precisely because it forces us to confront the often hidden violence that underlies the seemingly rational and ordered structures of modern society. He challenges us to look beyond the surface, to see the ways in which power operates, not only through these explicit acts of aggression, but also through subtle forms of coercion and control.
Now let's explore Foucault. His work on biopower seems absolutely central to Agamben's analysis. Can you tell us a bit more about how Agamben builds on Foucault's ideas? How does he adapt and reinterpret Foucault's insights to develop his own unique perspective?
Foucault, as you know, argued that modern power is increasingly focused on the management and control of life itself. He called this biopower and saw it operating through a variety of institutions, from prisons to hospitals to schools. It's a power that seeks to regulate, optimize, normalize life, to bring it under the control of rational and scientific principles.
And Agamben sees a direct connection between biopower and the creation
of their life, right. He sees biopower as the mechanism
through which
individuals are reduced to their bare biological existence, stripped of their political and ethical status.
Yes. For Agamben, the camp is the ultimate expression of biopower, the place where the management of life is taken to its most extreme and terrifying conclusion. In the camp, individuals are reduced to their bare biological existence, subject to the absolute control of the sovereign power. They're no longer citizens, subjects, or even human beings in the full sense of the word. They are simply Homo Sacer, bare life that can be disposed of without consequence. So the camp, for Agamben, is not just a historical aberration, but a logical outcome of the biopolitical logic that has been developing in the West for centuries. It's a chilling indictment of modernity, suggesting that the very forces that promise progress and enlightenment have also created the conditions for the most horrific forms of
the violence and dehumanization.
That's right. And that's what makes Agamben's work so unsettling. He's suggesting that the logic of the camp is not something that we can simply leave behind in the past. It's a logic that continues to operate in the present, in the way we manage and control populations, in the way we define what is considered normal and healthy, and in the way we treat those who are deemed outside the bounds of the political community. It's a challenge to complacency, a call to be vigilant against the composura, the insidious ways in which power can operate in our world. One of the things that struck me about Agamben's book is his analysis of the relationship between sovereignty and law. He argues that the sovereign is both, inside and outside the legal order. Can you elaborate on that? How can the sovereign simultaneously be the source of law and yet stand above it?
Well, Agamben is building on Schmidt's idea of the exception here. He argues that the sovereign is the one who decides on the exception, the one who can suspend the law in a state of emergency. This means that the sovereign is not simply subject to the law, but also stands outside it, able to transcend its limits when necessary. It's a precarious position, one that grants the sovereign immense power, but also exposes them to the risk of lawlessness and tyranny.
But doesn't this create a dangerous situation? If the sovereign is above the law, then who can hold them accountable? Who can prevent them from abusing their power?
That's a crucial question, and one that Agamben doesn't fully answer. He's more concerned with analyzing the mechanisms of power than with proposing solutions. But his work does raise important questions about the limits of sovereignty and the potential for tyranny. It challenges us to think critically about the ways in which power is structured, and to be wary of any system that grants absolute authority to a single individual or institution.
Agamben uses a lot of examples from Roman law to illustrate his points.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of how he connects ancient Roman law to modern concepts of sovereignty and bare life? How does he bridge that historical gap?
Sure. One of the most striking examples is his discussion of the Roman figure of the Homo Sacer. The Homo Sacer was an individual who was banned from the community and could be killed with impunity by anyone. They were, in essence, stripped of all legal protections and reduced to bare life. They existed in a state of absolute vulnerability, subject to the whims of anyone who encountered them.
And Agamben sees a parallel between the Homo Sacer and those who are excluded from the political community in the modern world, right? He sees this ancient figure as a prototype for the ways in which modern societies continue to create and manage categories of people who are deemed expendable or unworthy of protection.
Exactly, he argues that. Figures like refugees, stateless persons, and those who are subject to extraordinary rendition are all contemporary examples of Homo Sacer. They exist in this zone of exception where they are denied the basic protections of law and can be subjected to violence and even death with impunity. They are, in a sense, the living embodiment of the state's power to decide who is worthy of life and who is not.
This all sounds incredibly bleak. Is there any hope for resistance in Agamben's framework? Does he offer any way out of this seemingly inescapable logic of power and exclusion?
It's a difficult question. Agamben is not a utopian thinker, and he doesn't offer easy solutions, but his work does point to the possibility of resistance through the very act of thinking, of refusing to accept the logic of the state of exception and of bare life. He challenges us to think critically about the systems of power that govern our lives, and to imagine alternative ways of being in the world.
So it's a kind of intellectual resistance,
Yeah.
a refusal to be complicit
Yeah.
in the systems of power that create and maintain bare life, a refusal to accept the categories and classifications that define who is worthy of life
Yeah.
and who is not.
Yes, and it's a resistance that requires constant vigilance, a constant awareness of the ways in which power operates and the potential for its abuse. It's a resistance that demands that we never stop questioning, never stop challenging, and never stop imagining a world where all life is valued and protected.
One of the most challenging aspects of Agamben's work is his dense and often difficult prose. He uses a lot of technical terminology and jumps between different philosophical traditions. Do you have any advice for readers who are struggling to understand his work?
I would say patience is key. Agamben's not a writer to be rushed. Read slowly, carefully. Don't be afraid to reread passages that you find difficult or challenging. It can also be helpful to read Agamben alongside other thinkers who've influenced him, like Schmidt, Benjamin, and Foucault. Understanding their work can really provide a lot of context for his own.
You mentioned earlier that that Homo Sacer is just the first volume in Agamben's larger project on Homo Sacer. What are some of the other key themes that he explores in subsequent volumes? Does he develop these ideas further?
He does. He expands on his analysis of sovereignty, bare life, and the state of exception in subsequent volumes. He examines the role of language and representation in the production of power, the relationship between politics and theology, and the potential for resistance in a world dominated by biopower. It's an ongoing project, one that continues to grapple with these fundamental questions of power, violence, and the meaning of human existence in the modern world.
It sounds like Agamben's work is a real call to action, a challenge to rethink the very foundations of the political order. He's not just offering a critique, but also a call for radical change, for a reimagining of the way we live together in the world.
Exactly, and it's a challenge that is all the more urgent in our current political climate, where we see these forces of nationalism, authoritarianism, and xenophobia are on the rise around the world. And Agamben's work provides us with tools for understanding these forces and for resisting their attempts to reduce human life to its barest form.
Now let's shift gears a little bit and take a closer look at one of Agamben's most controversial arguments. His claim that the concentration camp is the defining biopolitical space of modernity. This is where his analysis of the Homo Sacer and the state of exception comes together in a particularly stark and disturbing way.
Yeah. Agamben argues that the camp is not simply a historical aberration, but a logical outcome of the biopolitical logic that has been developing in the West for centuries. He sees the camp as a space where sovereign power is exercised without restraint, where the distinction between life and death is blurred, and where individuals are reduced to bare life. It's a space where the logic of power is taken to its extreme, revealing its capacity for absolute dehumanization. One of the key features of the camp for Agamben is its spatial structure. He describes the camp as a zone of indistinction where the normal legal and political order is suspended. Can you elaborate on that? What does he mean by a zone of indistinction? Well, in the camp,
the boundaries between inside and outside, public and private, legal and illegal are all blurred. The camp is a space where the sovereign can exercise absolute power, unconstrained by the The usual norms and procedures of law. It's a space where the rules of civilization are suspended, where life is reduced to its barest form, and where death becomes an everyday occurrence.
And this blurring of boundaries, this creation of a zone of indistinction,
Yeah.
is what allows for the production of bare life, right?
Yeah.
It's in this space where the normal rules no longer apply, that the sovereign's power to decide on life and death becomes absolute.
Exactly. In the camp, individuals are stripped of their political and legal status and reduced to their bare biological existence. They are no longer citizens, subjects, or even human beings in the full sense of the word. They're simply Homo Sacer, bare life that can be disposed of without consequence. Their lives are no longer protected by the law, and their deaths are no longer subject to the usual rituals and procedures of mourning and remembrance.
Agamben's analysis of the camp is deeply disturbing, but it's also incredibly insightful. It helps us understand how seemingly rational in modern societies can descend into barbarism. It forces us to confront the dark underbelly of modernity, the potential for violence and dehumanization that lurks beneath the surface of even the most civilized societies.
I agree. The camp is a warning sign, a reminder of the dangers of unfettered power and the fragility of human civilization. It's a reminder that the veneer of civilization is thin, and that the forces of barbarism are always lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the opportunity to erupt.
Now, I know you wanted to talk about Agamben's analysis of the relationship between the Homo Sacer and the figure of the wolf in European folklore. It seems like an unusual connection to make. How does he bring these two figures together?
Yes, this is a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of Agamben's work. He draws on the work of the German legal historian Rudolf von Jhering, who argued that the figure of the wolf played a key role in the development of early Germanic law. Jhering saw the wolf as a figure of the outsider, the one who existed beyond the boundaries of the community, and who was therefore seen as a threat to the social order.
How so? What's the connection between wolves and law? It seems like a rather strange juxtaposition.
Well, Jhering argued that in early Germanic societies, the wolf was seen as a creature that existed outside the bounds of the community and was therefore considered a threat to the social order. The killing of a wolf was not seen as a crime, but rather as a public service, an act that protected the community from danger. The wolf, in this sense, was a figure of lawlessness, of the untamed wilderness that threatened the fragile order of human society.
And Agamben connects this to the figure of the Homo Sacer, right? He sees the Homo Sacer as a kind of human wolf, someone who is excluded from the community and can be killed with impunity, someone who is, in a sense, placed outside the bounds of humanity and therefore becomes a legitimate target for violence.
Precisely. Agamben sees a continuity between this ancient practice of banishing or killing those who are deemed a threat to the community and the modern state's power to declare individuals Homo Sacer, to strip them of their legal protections and expose them to violence. He suggests that the figure of the wolf, the outlaw, the outsider, has haunted the Western imagination for centuries, providing a template for the ways in which societies have sought to exclude and eliminate those who are deemed dangerous or undesirable.
So the figure of the wolf helps us to understand the deep historical roots of the concept of bare life and the state of exception. It reveals the ways in which the logic of exclusion and violence has been woven into the fabric of Western thought and culture for centuries.
That's right. It shows that the logic of exclusion and violence that underlies the concept of the Homo Sacer is not something new or unique to the modern world. It's a logic that has been with us for centuries, shaping the ways in which we understand ourselves, our communities, and the world around us. It's a logic that we need to confront and challenge if we are to create a more just and humane world.
This raises an important question. If the logic of the Homo Sacer is so deeply rooted in our history and culture, is there any hope of escaping it? Can we break free from this cycle of violence and exclusion that seems to have defined so much of human history?
That's a difficult question, and one that Agamben doesn't offer easy answers to, but his work does suggest that the first step towards resistance is awareness, a recognition of the ways in which power operates and the potential for its abuse. We need to understand the history of these concepts, the ways in which they've been used to justify violence and oppression in order to begin to imagine a different future.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Agamben's Homo Sacer. So it's a challenging but incredibly important book that offers a powerful critique of modern power and a call to resist the forces that seek to reduce human life to bare life. We talked about the central concepts of sovereignty, bare life, the state of exception, and the camp. We also discussed Agamben's analysis of figures like the Homo Sacer and the wolf, and how they help us to understand the deep historical roots of the logic of exclusion and violence.
I agree. Agamben's work is essential reading for anyone who wants to understand the complexities of power in the modern world and the challenges we face in defending human dignity and freedom. It's a work that demands careful attention, critical thinking, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the societies we live in.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I wanted to touch on one more important concept from Agamben's work, his idea of form of life. It seems like a concept that offers a glimmer of hope in his otherwise bleak analysis. Can you elaborate on what he means by this term?
Form of life is a key concept in Agamben's later work, and it's one that he develops in response to what he sees as the limitations of traditional political categories like the people or the citizen. He sees these categories as inherently exclusionary, as defining who is included in the political community and who is excluded.
So what does he mean by form of life? Is it a way of life that exists outside of these traditional political categories?
For Agamben, form of life refers to a way of living that is not defined by traditional political categories or identities. It's a way of living that is, in a sense, pre-political or non-political. It's a way of living that it's based on shared practices, rituals, and forms of life. He sees it as a way of being in the world that is not determined by the state, the law, or any other
general authority.
So it's a kind of communal existence that exists outside the sphere of the state and the law, a way of life that is self-governing, self-determining, and based on shared values and practices rather than on external rules and regulations. Yes, in a way, Agamben sees form of life as a potential site of resistance to biopolitics because it offers a way of living that is not subject to the state's power to manage and control life. It's a way of life that is based on the inherent value of life itself rather than on its political or economic utility.
Can you give us an example of what a form of life might look like? Does Agamben offer any concrete examples of communities or groups that embody this concept?
Agamben himself doesn't offer many concrete examples, but we might think of things like monastic communities, indigenous cultures, or even artistic movements as examples of forms of life that exist, at least in part, outside the sphere of the state and the law. These are communities that define themselves based on their own internal values and practices, rather than on the dictates of external authorities.
So Agamben's concept of form of life offers a glimmer of hope in a world that often seems dominated by biopower and the logic of the Homo Sacer. It suggests that there are ways of living that are not reducible to bare life, ways of living that can resist the state's power to manage and control our existence.
Yes, I think that's a fair reading. It suggests that there are ways of living that are not reducible to bare life, ways of living that can resist the state's power to manage and control our existence. It's a concept that invites us to think differently about the possibilities of human community and the potential for resistance in a world that often seems determined by forces beyond our control.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this segment of our deep dive into Agamben's work. We've explored his analysis of the relationship between sovereignty and biopolitics, his critique of the rights of man, and his concept of form of life. It's been a dense and challenging discussion, but one that I think has been incredibly valuable.
I agree. Agamben's work forces us to think critically about the ways in which power operates in the modern world and the challenges we face in defending human dignity and freedom. It's a work that requires careful attention, critical thinking, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the societies we live in.
I agree. Agamben's, he's not an easy read, but his work is essential for anyone who wants to understand the complexities of our current political moment. He challenges us to look beyond the surface, to see the ways in which power operates in these subtle and often invisible ways, and to imagine alternative possibilities for human existence.
Now let's turn our attention to another aspect of Agamben's thought, his reading of the work of the German Jewish philosopher
Sure.
Walter Benjamin. Benjamin's work, with its focus on history, language,
Yeah.
and the messianic, has had a profound influence on Agamben's own thinking.
Yeah, Agamben was a student of Benjamin's, and his work is deeply marked by Benjamin's thinking on history, language, and the Messianic. One of the key concepts that Agamben takes from Benjamin is this idea of pure violence. Benjamin, writing in the shadow of rising Nazism, was trying to understand how violence could be used to break this cycle of law and oppression. He argued that there's a form of violence that is not simply destructive, but also redemptive, a violence that can create the possibility for a new beginning.
This concept of pure violence seems paradoxical. How can violence inherently destructive also be redemptive? How does Agamben reconcile this apparent contradiction? It's a difficult concept and one that has been subject to much debate and interpretation. For Benjamin, pure violence is a form of violence that's not tied to any particular political order or ideology. It's a violence that erupts from outside the system, a force of disruption and upheaval that has the potential to shatter the existing order and create the possibility for something new. Agamben sees a connection between Benjamin's pure violence and the figure of the Homo Sacer.
That connection isn't immediately clear. How does the Homo Sacer, who is typically the victim of violence, embody this concept of pure violence?
Agamben argues that the Homo Sacer is the figure who embodies the potential for both violence and redemption. On the one hand, the Homo Sacer is the one who's excluded from the law and subject to violence. They are the embodiment of bare life, stripped of all protections and exposed to the whims of sovereign power. On the other hand, the Homo Sacer also represents the possibility of a break with the existing order, the possibility of a new beginning. They are the figure who stands outside the system, who's not bound by its rules and norms.
So there's a kind of messianic potential in the figure, the Homo Sacer, a potential for radical transformation, for the creation of a new world order that is not based on the logic of exclusion and violence.
That's one way of interpreting it. Agamben sees the Homo Sacer as a figure who stands at the threshold of the political, a figure who can either be sacrificed to maintain the existing order or who can become the catalyst for a radical transformation of the political. It's a precarious position, one fraught with danger, but also pregnant with possibility.
This all sounds very abstract and theoretical.
Yeah.
Can you give us a concrete example of how these ideas might play out in the real world? How can we connect this concept of the Homo Sacer as a potential agent of change to actual political struggles?
One example that Agamben discusses is the figure of the refugee. The refugee is someone who has been forced to flee their home country and who is often denied basic rights and protections.
Wow.
In Agamben's terms, the refugee is a kind of Homo Sacer, someone who exists in a state of exception outside the bounds of the law.
But how does the refugee, often seen as a victim of circumstance, embody this potential for radical change?
The refugee, precisely because they exist outside the system, has the potential to disrupt it. They challenge the very foundations of the nation state, its borders, its laws, and its claims to sovereignty. They force us to confront the limitations of our existing political categories and to imagine new ways of organizing ourselves, new ways of relating to each other.
So the refugee in Agamben's view becomes a kind of limit figure, someone who exposes the contradictions and limitations of the existing order, and who in their very existence points towards the possibility of something different, something new.
Precisely. The refugee is a figure who challenges us to rethink our notions of belonging, citizenship, and the very nature of the political community. They force us to confront the question of who we are and what we stand for as a society. Do we embrace those who are different, those who are in need, or do we turn our backs on them, reinforcing the very logic of exclusion and violence that has created the refugee crisis in the first place?
Agamben's work is often criticized for being overly pessimistic and abstract, but I think there's a real sense of urgency and even hope in his writing. A hope that we can find a way to break the cycle of violence and exclusion that has defined so much of human history. He's not offering any easy answers, but he is forcing us to ask these difficult questions, to confront uncomfortable truths and to imagine alternative possibilities.
I agree. Agamben's work is not a blueprint for utopia, but it does offer a powerful critique of the present and a call to imagine a different future. It's a future where power is not exercised through violence and exclusion, but through dialogue, understanding, and a recognition of the inherent dignity of all human beings.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Agamben's work. We've explored his analysis of sovereignty, bare life, the state of exception, biopolitics, the camp, and his reading of Benjamin. It's been a dense and challenging discussion, but one that I think has been incredibly valuable.
Indeed, Agamben's work provides us with a powerful set of tools for understanding the complexities of the modern world and the challenges we face in defending human dignity and freedom.
As you said at the beginning, Agamben doesn't offer any easy solutions, but he does challenge us to think critically about the ways in which power operates, the ways in which lives are categorized and valued, and the ways in which violence is justified and normalized.
His work is a call to action, an invitation to resist the forces that seek to reduce us to bare life, to refuse the logic of the state of exception, and to imagine new forms of political community based on inclusion justice and a recognition of the inherent value of all human life.
And perhaps returning to your earlier point about the situation in Gaza, Agamben's work can help us understand the ways in which the Palestinians have been systematically excluded from the protections of international law, rendered as Homo Sacer in a state of perpetual exception.
Precisely. When viewed through the lens of Agamben's analysis, the situation in Gaza becomes a stark example of the ways in which sovereign power can operate outside the bounds of law, reducing a population to bare life, subject to violence and death with impunity. It's a chilling reminder of the fragility of human rights in the face of power, and the urgent need to challenge these systems that create and maintain such conditions.
Thank you for guiding us through this dense and challenging material. Agamben is certainly not a light read, but his work is essential for anyone who wants to grapple with the fundamental questions of power, violence, and the meaning of human existence in the modern world.
It's been a pleasure discussing these complex ideas with you. I hope this deep dive has been helpful in illuminating some of the key concepts in Agamben's work and in prompting further reflection on the nature of power and the future of human freedom.
To our listener, we leave you with the unsettling but crucial task of confronting these questions yourself. What does it mean to live in a world where the logic of the Homo Sacer persists? How can we resist the forces that seek to reduce us to bare life? And can we, as Agamben suggests, imagine a different future, a future where all life is valued and protected, where the state of exception is not the norm, and where the possibility of a truly just and humane world remains open? These are the questions that Agamben's work compels us to ask, questions that demand our attention, our critical engagement, and our unwavering commitment to a better future.